Hello, hello, and happy marvelous Monday, everybody. How are you today? I hope that you are doing well. If you are in the DC metropolitan area, I hope that you have kept warm because it's been extremely cold. I know that a lot of people are not really feeling this cold weather and the snow that we received, but listen, winter is upon us. And I hope that you have been not just warm, but I hope that you've been well as healthy. So listen, again, I'm excited that you are joining me today. I'm Carissa Span, the landlord and tenant expert. This is what I do each and every Monday. I bring you information for landlords, for tenants, and for the entire rental community. If this is your first time tuning in, please make sure that you subscribe to that YouTube channel. Go to that YouTube channel, smash that subscribe button so that you'll be the first to know when I am live and when I am online. I want this discussion today to be interactive as I am sharing the 3 questions to ask before a rental move-in. So this information is definitely going to be applicable for landlords, also for tenants. And so if you know someone who should tune in or who should watch this replay, please share this information or tag them to this video. I'm live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So again, welcome and thank you so much for tuning in. Before I get into the discussion, let me know that you can hear my audio okay in the comment section. Let me know, just type a yes in the comment box if you can hear my audio okay. I'm testing out some new equipment today. I want to make sure that I'm coming to you live and audible and extremely clear. All right, so today my goal is to, as we are having this thought-provoking and engaging conversation, I want to make sure that the information I share is relevant and clear, but please make sure that you can hear me okay. So if you don't mind, I want you to just type yes if you can hear my audio okay. And while I'm doing that, waiting for a response, let me just give this disclaimer on today. The information that I share is not legal advice. However, I will be sharing the industry's best tips as well as practices. Okay, thank you so much for that, Renee. Thank you so much for tuning in, beautiful. All right, so the information that I share, I know that sometimes I get emails and people ask if I'm an attorney, if I can give legal advice. I am not an attorney, okay? I'm a landlord and tenant expert. That is my lane. So I just want to put that disclaimer out there that I am not giving legal advice, but I'm definitely going to answer any questions that you have today. I want you, if you are a tenant, I want you to share what questions you think would be helpful, or maybe if you're currently living in a place, maybe to think of some questions would have been helpful for you if you would have asked your landlord before you moved in. And if you're a landlord, what questions or what is your current practice? What questions are you asking tenants before they move in? I want this to be an interactive conversation today. All right. So I want to hear your feedback. All right. So again, I'm delighted to have you join me for this discussion today. I look forward to engaging with you all. I know that I have students who are tuned in, and I'm excited about that. And so I do want to get into a deep dive. I'm looking at some comments that came in. All right. So I'll get to your comments. Please let me know where you're tuned in from. Let me know if you're in the DC metropolitan area, where are you on the map? And also, what platform are you watching on? I see that some are tuned in on YouTube. I see that some are tuned in on LinkedIn. But let me know which platform you're watching from, because I like to know what works best. All right, so today, as I am talking about 3 questions that should be asked before a tenant moves into the property, I'm going to share some information for tenants. I'm going to share tips for tenants. I'm also going to share information for landlords and share tips for landlords because I want us to address some ugly truths, dispel some myths that are out there, right? Because that's what it's all about. My goal is to make sure that the information that I share is clear. I want to make sure that the information that I share is relevant and applicable for the entire rental community. All right, just a little bit about me. Again, this is what I do each and every week, and I love bringing information to you all because I get a lot of questions, I get a lot of feedback, I get a lot of emails. And so it's always easier for me to just do a live to address your questions. So if you do have questions on today, please drop it in the comment section. I will respond to it. All right. And again, we're talking about the 3 questions that should be asked before there is a rental move-in. This is going to be helpful for owners, for property managers, for those of you who are investors. You're looking to get into property management. You're looking to purchase rental property. And so whether you are managing the property or you have someone who is, you should still be knowledgeable about questions that you can ask. Now, today's segment, I'm not going to touch on things that you cannot ask because that could be a whole hour-long conversation. So I'm not going to touch on that today. I usually touch on what not to do, but today I'm touching on things that you should do before moving a tenant in, or before you, if you are a tenant, before you move into a rental property. So one of the things that I like to do is make sure that I'm sharing information on both sides of the aisles, right? Because after all, I'm a landlord and tenant expert. And so having been in this space for almost 30 years, I recognize that sometimes there is a disconnect between landlords as well as tenants. When the two should be coming together like this, sometimes they're separated and far apart. So I just like to go straight down the aisle, straight down the middle, and share information for both sides, for both parties. So today, one of the things that I do want landlords to understand is that when you are renting property, I know that some of you may know this because you've been watching, you've been tuned in over a period of time. But before a tenant moves into your rental property, unless they are participating in some sort of housing subsidy program, you want to make sure, please, ma'am, please, sir, make sure that you understand the financial capacity of your tenant before they move in. All right. And that's going to be so important because you essentially want to, first and foremost, you should know whether or not that tenant could afford the rent. I know that rents are going through the roof in a lot of areas. They're like just sky high, and I get it. One of the things that I say commonly to landlords is this: when it comes to renting your property, and I take on a philosophy that if you treat your business like a business, it's going to pay you like a business. And if you treat it like a hobby, it's going to pay you like a hobby. Well, I've had a lot of tenants who reached out to me and they said, Carissa, my landlord's rent is just too much. I can't afford it. And I get it. But here's the thing. It is a business. Everything goes up. Taxes go up. Utility costs go up. Mortgages. Some people have these mortgages and they are increasing, right? And so there are a lot of variables and factors which goes into or causes rent to increase. And then, of course, we have, just certain things that drives the rent up, especially in markets like DC, where at a point where the rents were just kind of leveling off throughout the nation, throughout the country, DC rents continue to increase, right? And so there are a lot of things that goes into that. I'm not going to touch on that today, but I'm going to touch on the 3 questions that, as a landlord, you should be asking tenants before they move in. So let me pause. I see another comment that's come in. Hey, Christina, Sheena, good evening, beautiful. Happy, marvelous Monday to you. Thank you so much for tuning in. All right, so financial capacity, financial responsibility. You want to understand as a landlord what the tenant's income is before they move in. You want to make sure that they could afford to pay the rent. And I know that some landlords, especially those who are maybe self-managing small mom and pop landlords, or maybe you're new into this property management space, sometimes you may not know how to determine whether or not a tenant can afford to pay the rent. A rule of thumb is that the tenant's income should be at least 3 times the amount of the rent. So for instance, if the rent is, let's say, $1,000, that tenant's income should be 3 times that amount. All right. You want to make sure that it's affordable. And so that would be $3,000 a month. So when you do that, you're setting yourself up, you're setting the tenant up, you're setting the property up to be a success. That's important because if anything happens, we know that sometimes the holidays come around. Some people celebrate holidays, some don't. But for those who celebrate the holidays, one of the things that I see commonly is this. Sometimes tenants, when they're in a bind, the first thing they do is they'll pinch away from their rent. And if it's already too much, if it's too expensive, if it's a situation where they already cannot afford the rent, it puts the landlord, the property manager, in a situation where maybe they have to take the tenant to court because it's hard for that tenant to catch up. And so if you know in advance whether or not the tenant could afford it, that is definitely what you want to do. Because here's the thing, financial stability is a landlord's responsibility to know upfront. You will reduce all risk. Well, not all, but you'll likely reduce the risk of running into a situation where you have a tenant who just cannot afford to pay. Now you have to spend thousands of dollars over a period of time. You're losing money and you still have to pay money. So for instance, let's say this tenant is not paying rent because they just can't afford to catch up, right? And so here it is, you're not collecting rent. And now, depending on whether or not you have to get an attorney, a landlord and tenant attorney to represent you in court, now you have to pay the attorney, you have to pay the court costs, the court fees, right? And so if you understand whether or not the tenant can afford it, sometimes you can reduce the risk of having to go through that situation. And let me just assure you, that's never fun to go through. I'm working and talking to a young lady, true story. She has not received payment from her tenant in over a year. Okay. The mortgage has to be paid on the property. There are other expenses and costs that has to come out of her pocket. And it's been almost like the worst nightmare trying to get a court case to go before a judge and get an eviction. She's just hoping that she can work it out with this tenant and the tenant will move. And I told her, listen, you just have to enforce your lease. I know it's hard. I know it's tough. It's been over a year. She hasn't collected rent. And now she has to pay out of her pocket for an attorney that landlord cannot afford, right? And so reduce that risk of going down that road. And that's one of the reasons why I share this information. Hello, Carter. Thank you so much for tuning in. Happy Marvelous Monday to you. Hey, Miss K, you said, what do you do if you have a situation with the housing authority where they're committing fraud, including the supervisor is in on it? Listen, that's a good question. I don't know what the situation is, but there is a board of directors that oversee housing agencies. There is an executive director of agencies. You can always reach out to them. When you know what the fraud is, when you know what the concerns are, when you know what the complaints are, facts, when you have those facts, that concrete evidence, I would suggest to, you can always request a meeting. You can send an email. You can always attend board meetings if there is a possibility. Let me just say that, because not all board meetings are open to the public, but in situations where that is the situation, by all means, with your facts, go before the board, go before the executive director and present your findings. And that's the best way to handle it. So keep in mind that it's not what you know, it's what you can prove, because documentation beats conversation any day. All right. Your next question, how do I get in contact with these people? That's a great question. If you can do me a favor, let me know which agency it is. I can maybe try to look up whoever your point of contact is. All right. So I do hope that that's helpful for you. And thank you so much for tuning in from the YouTube channel. All right. So here is the second thing for landlords. The first one was financial stability and oversight. The second one, let me pull that up, financial stability and oversight, making sure that tenants can afford the rental property. Here's the second one. When it comes to their rental history issues, right? Here's the ugly truth. Sometimes tenants are not, let me just say this. All tenants are not going to be in a position where they're just going to flat out say, oh, well, I had a dispute with my landlord over property damage. I busted all the windows out. I had holes in the walls. They're not going to go through this whole laundry list of things. They're just not going to volunteer that information. But as a landlord, you can do your job as a landlord or property manager. Ask those questions. Don't neglect to explore that rental history. Now, here's one thing that I would never recommend. Please hear me on this. Me personally, I would never recommend asking a tenant for landlord and tenant reference. Can anybody guess why? Let me go to my comment section here. Okay, I see your comment, the Housing Authority, the City of Los Angeles. If you can do me a favor, send me an email. I do have connections in LA. Let me give you my email address. So please email me and I will follow up with you. Let me pull my email address up for you. So that's my email address right there. Please email me. I will follow up. All right. So in your email, just state the concern, state the city of the Housing Authority in your name, and I will follow with you. All right. And thank you again for tuning in. So Sheena, I see your comment. I'm going to come back to you. So here's why I do not ask for landlord references. Okay. Please hear me on this. I'm guilty of having done this, which is why I do not ask tenants for Hey, Vic, you said them references could be false. Bingo. That's right. That's right. Hey, Edwin, thank you so much for tuning in. You said the tenant and the previous landlords may be friends. Absolutely. But now here's the thing. Let me go back to your comment, Vic. So you said the references could be false. Absolutely. Listen, I have had some tenants who are not the most desirable people. Okay. I was so happy to see some of them leave. So happy that I did not have to go to court to get them out because that would have cost more money. And so I lied. Okay. I emphatically lied to the new landlord, gave them a positive review, gave them a positive reference because it was just easier for me to do that versus me being truthful and honest to say, oh, well, you know what? They haven't paid the rent. They tore up the property. Their dogs destroyed the cabinets, used the bathroom, all in the rental property, right? The new landlord would not have rented if I was honest. So please kind of weigh your options. Sometimes you can get a good, honest reference. Sometimes you just might get someone who did what, like I said, what I did. I lied because it was just easier for me to pass that tenant on, to pass that headache on to somebody else. And it was less expensive for me to do that. So I would never recommend a landlord reference. And true story, I've done it. And I know that that's funny and it may not be the most ethical thing to do, but it was definitely cost effective. It cost me nothing but a small lie to get rid of that tenant versus having to pay for an attorney, go to court, on top of the damages, on top of the unpaid rent that was already a loss. Okay, so now let me get back in my comments. Christina, you said you had a young lady called me today and asked me Okay, let me see. I had a young lady call me today and ask me what should she do when the landlord allowed her to move in under the impression that an agency would pay the security deposit. Now she's found out that the agency denied her and the landlord allowed her to move in. She only been in her place for a month and the landlord wants to take her to court. Is there any advice you can give me to give to her? Great question. Thank you so much for that. Um, I would always say, first and foremost, I would always recommend that as a tenant, that all tenants verify any assistance that they're going to get before they move in and get it in writing. Okay. For landlords, please make sure that you confirm up front before tenants move in who's going to pay the security deposit. So here's the thing, Christina Sheena. Great question. Thank you so much for that. The landlord, depending on the jurisdiction, that landlord cannot evict the tenant over not paying the security deposit. Now, they could evict the tenant for non-payment of rent, but if they allow the tenant to move in and not pay the security deposit, then what can they do? Now, I know that some housing agencies will assist tenants with paying the security deposit. I do know that. And so I would strongly, strongly, strongly recommend, Christina, if you could just let the tenant know to possibly look for resources specific to their location, wherever they live. Look for security deposit assistance from some sort of government agency. There are some nonprofits. There are some churches who will assist tenants with paying the security deposit. But now here's the thing. There's nothing stopping that landlord from moving forward trying to collect what should have been paid. And it is unfortunate that this tenant has found herself in this situation where she's threatened to be taken to court because it doesn't feel good, right? When you're threatened to be sued, you're trying to keep a roof over your head and you thought you were going to get assistance. So my heart goes out to this young lady. So let her know to look for some resources. And then worst case scenario, if she doesn't want the headache, if she doesn't want the stress, if she doesn't want the nightmare of being potentially taken to court or potentially evicted, because I'm sure that weighs heavy on her mind, um, maybe suggest to her to try to come up with a repayment agreement or a payment agreement to pay the security deposit, because the security deposit should have been paid before that tenant moved in. So I would suggest those things to her, and email me, Christina, and I can see if I can help you out with maybe some security deposit options for this young lady. So email me, let me know the jurisdiction, where she is, and I'll see what I can do. Absolutely. It's my absolute pleasure. All right. So now let me get back into the meat of this. All right. So I talked about, I shared the financial stability. I talked about for landlords, I'm giving tips for landlords, rental history issues. You definitely want to make sure that you're clear on why this tenant moved. Like, what is the situation? Why are they moving from their previous property? So when you understand whether or not there's some conflicts, you can kind of make a decision. Just have a conversation, right? Be like, hey, Mr. and Mrs. applicant, Mr. and Mrs. prospect with Mr. and Mrs. tenant. Hey, what brings you to the neighborhood? What made you interested, or why are you moving? Why are you leaving, right? Because when you have those conversations, you'll have a clear understanding of what's going on in that previous place, wherever they previously lived. Here is something that I have always viewed as a red flag. When I have these conversations with tenants and they say, oh, I moved because my landlord was a slumlord, they never made repairs, and they just go down this whole laundry list. I'm listening to what I don't hear. I don't hear anything positive. I don't hear any resolution. Like, I tried to work with my landlord. It's just always complaint, 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 complaint. And for me, when that's a red flag, like, they're talking. And now, not to say, let me just put this plug in here. It's not to say that those things are not true. There are some really bad landlords. Okay. But then there are some really good landlords, and that tenants did not even try to work with the good ones and would just give this negative spiel. And so what I typically do is, when I hear those laundry lists of complaints, I'm thinking to myself, as good as I am, as soft as I am, as sweet and nice as I am, I know that even on my good day, a tenant can have a bad day and would give me a negative review. And do I want to go through that? Absolutely not. That's a turnoff for me. That is a red flag. So have those conversations with prospects when they're coming in. Don't be afraid to ask those questions, right? You're not probing, you're not disrespecting the tenant, but you are getting an understanding in terms of why they are leaving. And if you understand there's a conflict, to see how the tenant tried to resolve it. All right. And then the next thing is when it comes to rules and regulations, you want to make sure that there is that you address any unclear expectation and rules. That's going to be so important. As a matter of fact, no, let me bring that up because I want you to see that on the screen. Boom, there you go. Unclear expectations and rules. You want to avoid issues, right? So you want to discuss expectations up front. You want to discuss rules up front. And so you want to make sure that as you are going through these things, that your potential tenant understands that there may be rules and policies in place, because without clear rules and guidelines, tenants may unknowingly violate rules, right? Which could lead to frustration, strained relationships, and worse. So here are my tips for you as a landlord. I'm going to start with landlords first. So 3 questions that you should absolutely ask tenants before they move in. Can they provide proof of income or employment verification? All tenants may not work, but if they have the income and if they can afford to rent the property, then you're in a good place, right? So don't just ask for employment verification. Ask for income verification. Maybe they're self-employed. Maybe they're on retirement. Maybe they receive disability. Whatever the income is, ask them for income verification before they move in to determine whether or not you know that they can afford to pay the rent. Right? You can request pay stubs. You can definitely request employment verification from their employer. You can also request their tax returns, because this is how they show income stability. Here's a second question as a landlord you should definitely ask tenants. Again, why are you leaving your current resident? Understand the reasons that they are given you, right, in terms of why they're leaving. Maybe they just like your property. Maybe they just like the neighborhood. They grew up there. Maybe they're relocating. It's close to work. It's close to their family, shopping, dining. Ask the questions so that you'll understand the reasons, and ask them to provide this context, because it will definitely help you. And again, when it comes to clear expectations and rules, encourage tenants. You always want to encourage them to express their needs. Ask them, are there any specific concerns, or are there any specific expectations that you have of the property? And when you ask these questions, you'll get a clear understanding in terms of what this tenant needs from you as a property manager or landlord. Because here's the thing, sometimes you may not be able to cater to every style of tenant. Some tenants can be needy. Some tenants, they need a friend. Some tenants, they need like this embrace. You have to stroke their ego. Some tenants, they'll get in a rental property, they'll pay their rent. They'll be really good tenants. And listen, I have good tenants who are watching, so I know that it's possible. So those are definitely 3 areas of questions you want to ask. So now let me turn and focus my attention to tenants, because that's one of the things that I always like to do. All right. So if you're a tenant, here is a question that you can and should ask your next potential landlord. You can ask them to provide you with details about the rent payment process. Discuss the methods of payment. Do they accept cash? Do they accept money order, cashier's check? What are the due dates for the rent? Are there any late fees? Are there any other fees that you'll be responsible for paying? And when you have that information, you'll know how to pay your rent. Listen, if the rent is due by the 5th of the month, tenants, if the rent is due by the 5th, your rent is due on the 1st, but not later than the 5th. Doesn't mean that you should wait until the 5th to pay your rent. So when you understand the due date, and you understand that, okay, after the 5th, you have to pay a late fee. even if the 5th is on a weekend or a holiday. It does not, it doesn't change the fact that your rent is due on the 1st. All right. But when you ask those questions and you have clear answers, that kind of helps you to prepare to pay your rent, knowing what's due, knowing what the fees are. I've had tenants who paid their rent and for whatever reason, they paid it after the due date and they expected that the late fees would be waived. Absolutely not. We don't waive late fees. If you know your rent is due on the 1st, just like the bills have to be paid on the property. If the landlord don't pay the mortgage, it's foreclosed on. If they don't pay the taxes, they may be able to lose that tax. They may be able to lose a property at the tax auction. And so there are consequences when you don't pay your rent. But now here's the thing. I told a tenant just recently, a young guy who reached out to me. He says, listen, I'm trying to work with my landlord. And I said, well, what is your history of paying your rent? He says, well, I pay my rent. And I asked, well, how many late fees have you had in 12 months? The gentleman, he was honest. He said, I've had to pay 8 late fees within 12 months. So that denotes to me that he has a pattern of paying his rent late. I am not a fan of giving up extra money, is what I told him. I said, you're giving away money because of your habits. And if you have poor habits of paying your bills, then obviously the landlord is allowed and should be collecting late fees. So if you don't want to give up the extra money, pay the bills by the due date. If you pay the day after, it could cost you money. All right. So here is the second question as a tenant. What is the preferred method and the frequency of communication? Listen, let me just be honest for some of my colleagues who are watching, okay? Some of my colleagues do not want to talk to you consistently by text message, right? Some of them don't want to talk consistently by telephone. Some of them prefer text messages. Some of them prefer emails. I don't want you to assume that everybody does things the same way. People have different styles, right? And so ask the question up front. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, what works best for you? Because you want to know how to be able to reach them if you need to reach out to that property manager or the landlord when you move into that rental property. You want to discuss, like I said, whether it's text, emails, telephone calls, and you want to make sure that when you do reach out to them, what is the best time? So for instance, it is what? 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm doing this live. If a tenant is reaching out to me now, I'm just not available, right? Unless it's an emergency. Now, I do have some colleagues who will talk to their tenants 8 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night, but after 9, that's the cutoff time. And so whether you have a small landlord or a larger management company, ask those questions. Some companies have set hours. They're open between 9 to 4, 9 to 5. And after that, they don't answer the phone. So whatever the policies are, if you ask those questions, you'll know in advance. All right. And here's a third tip. Questions for tenants. You should ask if they could share specific rules and regulations about the property. Don't wait until you move in to find out if you like to smoke, whether it's cigarettes, hookah, whatever else people smoke, right? Don't wait until you move into the property to find out that this landlord absolutely hate whatever it is your choice of smoking is, right? Ask those questions up front. Do they have any rules? Do they have any expectations? Any policies that they should be that you should be aware of? And ask them to provide it to you in writing. Review it. And I know that sometimes as a tenant, you may really like the property, but there may be rules that are associated with the property. Maybe the owner or the property management representative or company really do care about the property. And so there may be strict rules and policies in place that you will be expected to adhere to when you move into that rental property. And you can definitely ask for those things in writing. I do hope that this was helpful. I know that I shared a lot today, but I definitely wanted to get this in the way because this is the time of the year where people are looking to move, people are planning to move. And so whether you are a tenant or you are a landlord, understand that you can always ask questions, right? And so make a list. What are some other questions that you think might be helpful? Let me know. Let me know your thoughts. So I shared three, the top three in my playbook. But let me hear from you as a tenant. What is another area? What's another question that you think might be helpful? As a landlord, what is your current policy? What is something that you are currently asking tenants? Or maybe you think would be a good idea? Let me know. I want to know. So if you can share that feedback with me, I'll definitely share it with others while we're live, while we have this time. I'm not going to hold you too long, but I do want that feedback. So in the comment section, and for those of you who are watching the replay, in the comment section, what are some other questions that you think would be good to ask? All right, so I see your comments are coming in. Okay, I see that. Thank you, Carter. You said, I'll be in touch soon. Okay. What are some other questions? What are some other things that you believe might be helpful? So questions that as a landlord would be good to ask a tenant, or as a tenant, some questions that you think would be good to ask a landlord. All right, so let me see here. And then also let me share my email address, because for those of you who desire to reach out to me, that's my email address at the bottom of the screen there. Please feel free to contact me. I do reply. I do respond to comments. When I see comments on my social media pages, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, I typically do respond to them myself. All right. Edwin, you said, how does a contract renewal process work? Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great question. So as a tenant, you want to ask your landlord in advance, how does the contract renewal process work? When it's time for that, when that lease expires, before it's renewed, if you understand how many days notice in advance that landlord is going to give you, if they'll contact you maybe like 90 days out to say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Tenant, we value you as a resident here in our fantastic rental community. We're just letting you know that your lease is about to expire and we would like to offer you a new lease term. You want to know what that looks like. If the rent is going to increase, if it's going to stay the same, are there any changes to the new lease, right? So that's a great question. Thank you, Edwin. All right, so that is my email address there. Are there any other questions that you think would be good, or any other comments that you think would be good to share before tenants move in, or as a tenant before you move into a rental property? And I do appreciate all the feedback, and thank you so much for tuning in. And so just a reminder, if you have not already subscribed to my YouTube channel, please go over to YouTube. Find me, Carissa Span, Landlord Life with Carissa Span. Life is spelled with a Y because you matter. Landlord Life. Landlord Life. Check me out. Smash that subscribe button so that you'll be the first to know when I'm live and online. Was this helpful for anybody today? I know that I shared a lot. I shared tips for landlords. I shared tips for tenants. And let me just go over what I shared for landlords really quickly as I do a recap and bring this to a close. You want to, as a landlord, make sure that you ask tenants up front. You want to know if they can provide proof of their income and their verification. This is showing income stability. You want to also find out, have no problem asking in the most professional way, never disrespectful, never talking down on people, but why are you leaving your current residence, right? You always want to make sure that you understand, and you are setting clear expectations and rules. So you want to make sure that you are having those conversations with potential tenants. Tips I've shared for tenants is this: asking a landlord if they can provide details about the rent payment process. You want to also find out what is the preferred method and the frequency of communication. If it's by phone, if it's by text, if it's by email, if it's a certain time where you know that the landlord is just not going to respond, you understand why you haven't heard back from the landlord until the next day. And then third and finally for the tenant is asking if they could share specific rules and regulations or any guidelines that are applicable to that rental property. All right, so that's my email address. Let me go to the comment section. All right, Christina, you said yes. Awesome. Thank you so much. I do appreciate you. Okay, so I think that's going to be it. Yeah, I think that's going to be it. All right. So listen, my time is up. I thank you for yours. And again, I hope that this was helpful. I'm Carissa Span, the abundantly blessed landlord and tenant expert. This is what I do each and every Monday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I share information to help landlords, to help tenants, and to hopefully positively impact the entire rental community. I hope that this was of value. Please share this with somebody else. I know that you could have been doing anything other than tune in. So I value you and your time. Thank you for showing up. Please make sure that you continue to show up every Monday right here. I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm on YouTube at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I'm going to say bye for now. Listen, again, if you're in the DC metropolitan area, it's cold. Y'all, please be safe. Y'all, please be warm. We may get another round of snow. I love the snow. This is the time I put on my boots and go out and play in the snow. I actually like driving in the snow now, but that's a different segment. So anyway, bye, y'all.